Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the so-called negotiation scorecard, but also more specifically how you subject the Brexit deal to a test in terms of whether or not it's a good deal. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So before I get into a few specifics, I want to point out a couple of things. So the first one is there's this scorecard. It was going around before the deal was even really concluded. It had been agreed on in principle at the political level, but the details were still being worked on, and yet along came this scorecard. It's not an independent analysis. Of course it's not, because anyone independent hadn't actually seen the deal yet. It came out before the agreement was even signed and legal text completed. It was an assessment by the UK negotiating team on their own work. So basically it's like, oh, this scorecard, it says how well the UK negotiating team did. Okay, who set the parameters? Who decided how you score it? Oh, the UK negotiating team did that. All right, who filled it in? Who actually did the scoring? The UK negotiating team. Would you trust an assessment of someone's work by the same people who carried out the work? No, me neither. The second thing is, although I'll be picking a few little flaws with it, I have to say, at the end of the day, there's no desperate need to argue too strongly on this point. I am actually personally loving the fact that Brexiteers are hailing this as a victory. They might as well. It was really annoying back in January when we actually left the EU and the angriest people on earth were Brexiteers. You know, I'm actually happy that Brexiteers, the people who've done this to us, are actually now happy. But it also means they fully accept the consequences of the Brexit to come. They won't, of course. It'll never be their fault. But when they try and wriggle out of it, we will remind ourselves of this. The three main hard Brexit newspapers, for example, all had headlines cheering the deal as a great victory. That's it. Oh, we don't need to read it. It's an absolutely brilliant victory. Fantastic. So there'll be no attacking it in the new year then. Brilliant. Nigel Farage, okay, he's done a little caveat. He still says he thinks a no deal would have been better, but he says that this deal is good. He approves of this deal. He supports this deal. Enough said. That's even though he hasn't read it yet, but that's fine. He's on record as saying he approves of the deal. He's also on record as saying it's not as good as no deal, but it is a good deal. Essentially, the bulk of influential Brexit proponents, not all, but the bulk of them, and media are supportive of the deal. And I am delighted. And they will, of course, use this scorecard, you may have seen it by now, to hail the great success. I would like them to do that. And I want them to record that for a posterity. However, there's a few wee problems with the way that David Frost's team have scored their own work. So what they did was to go down each provision and to assess, you know, each of them as either a UK win, an EU win, or a mutual compromise. And they have determined that 43% of it is a UK win, 17% of it is an EU win, and 40% is a mutual compromise. Therefore, the UK have won the deal. Now, one commentator immediately pointed out a bit of an odd application of this method. So they drew attention to, first of all, legal services. Now, the UK wanted a provision on legal services. Of course, service is very important to us. They were extremely vague about what the provision should be, only that there should be a provision in the deal. Now, the negotiating team scored this as a UK win. But if it was a UK win, then presumably the EU were opposed to there being a provision. No, they didn't. In fact, the scorecard even makes clear that the EU didn't care one way or the other. It was literally a case of the EU saying, we'd like something on legal services, and the EU going, yeah, whatever, we're not bothered. And the UK called that a win. That's a bit weird. But then you contrast this, the same commentator, David Alan Green, contrasts it with public procurement. Now here the EU wanted a provision, and they included details on what that provision should be. This was scored as a mutual compromise. Okay, so if it's a mutual compromise, then what that means is the UK also wanted a provision, but a different provision to the EU, and what we got was somewhere in between. No, the UK didn't care. That was something the EU wanted and the UK didn't care about. So the EU said, we want a provision on this, and the UK went, yeah, whatever. So when you go through the document, what you find is there's quite a lot of provisions in there that we wanted, the EU didn't oppose. It's like, yeah, haven't. And that was chalked up as a UK win. However, if the position was reversed and the EU wanted something and we didn't care about it, that was chalked up as a mutual compromise. So the tally is fabricated just on this point alone. Another thing to consider is that what this is just an adding up exercise. They've just gone through each provision, allocated a UK win, EU win or mutual compromise and totted it up. But not all provisions are equally important. For example, you might have one provision that covers basically £50 billion worth of trade. Another one may only cover about £50,000 worth of trade. Clearly, the provision dictating what happens to that £50 billion worth is more important. In fact, it's literally a million times more important. But both would be given the same weighting using this scoring system by the UK negotiators. So the UK may have wanted a whole load of tiny little things that aren't that important. The EU said, yeah. The EU may have wanted smaller, fewer, but more important things that the UK haggled over. And they went, it's not the same, is it? Essentially, when it comes to really scoring the agreement, let's think about what you'd be more sensibly would do now. So obviously there's going to have to be a careful analysis, which will take months to complete. We won't have the final result on what this looks like, even in theory, for some time. There's a lot to it. A lot of people haven't seen the details. Some things have already come out, of course. Now, also bear in mind that I'm doing this a couple of days ahead of publication because of Christmas, but I'm sticking to discussing only things that are known and can't change at this point. Part of the eventual analysis will include a few different foci. Now, different people will, of course, have different ideas on what should and shouldn't be assessed, and that's totally fine. You know, how you assess whether or not this Brexit deal is good is, to a large extent, subjective. But a Labour MP came up with a list that I think people on both sides would at least agree is a useful starting point. So Neil Coyle MP came up with 5 tests. I wouldn't say that if I were to come up with 5 tests, these are exactly the ones I would come up with, but I think both sides can agree, pro-Brexit, pro-EU, that they're all relevant. So the first one is it better than what we had before? Secondly, does it deliver what was promised? Third, does it impose new costs on British businesses? 4, does it downgrade any of our rights? And 5, does it make the UK less secure? So the first one, is it better than what we had before? No. However, the phrasing opens it up to subjective assessment. This deal means we have to accept rules that we no longer decide on. So as EU members, we were the rule makers. People kept behaving as if there was the EU and we were just like this entity that wasn't actually part of the EU. So whenever we had EU rules, it was never our rules, it was always the EU's rules because we weren't part of it apparently. But in reality, the vast majority, and I mean like 97% of EU rules, were either suggested by the UK from the start or suggested by someone else but fully supported by us because we approved of them as well. So we were rule makers. Outside of the EU, we're rule takers. Brexiteers think it's the other way around. So they will argue, yeah, but sovereignty in it. The other tests can be subject to more objective assessment, I think. So does it deliver what was promised? Of course, you have to then ask what those promises were and when those promises were. So the promises before the referendum, in terms of, for example, remaining in the single market, obviously it hasn't met those promises. In fact, it hasn't met any promise that was made before the referendum, not a single one. However, by the time of the last general election, that promise, along with all of the others, had been shelved by the Conservatives at least. So what was promised by Boris Johnson? Now, at this point, I will also point out the Brexit Party made no promises about Brexit either. So what was promised by the Conservatives? Well, they promised frictionless trade within the UK. I mean, we had frictionless trade for the bulk of Europe, but that was going to shrink down to the UK. Okay, but we've at least got frictionless trade within the UK. Oh, yeah, of course. Do we get that? No. We've set up a customs border between Britain and Northern Ireland, and even trading with Kent is going to be challenging, more challenging than before, because lorries need access if they intend to go anywhere near the port of Dover, but just to get into Kent. So I don't know how that's going to work if you were just ferrying stuff to Kent from outside of it. Does it mean we can trade freely with the EU? No. I know it's a free trade agreement. Doesn't mean we can trade freely. We can have tariff and quota free trade as long as we stick to EU standards. So although in theory we don't have to stick to EU standards, you know, because we make our own rules, in practice, if we don't stick to those EU rules, then we don't get that tariff and quota free trade either. But there are still two things that stop it being free trade. First of all, free trade obviously includes movement. Because we have to trade across customs borders, we need to fill in costly paperwork. You know, we need to complete registrations. This is far from being free. Sometimes when you produce lines that are for use in the British market as well as outside of Britain in the EU or Northern Ireland, then there will have to be different labelling. So that's got extra costs as well. So there are extra costs. Two, if we diverge our standards, as Johnson says he intends to, then the EU are permitted to take corrective action against affected products, which will of course mean tariffs, quotas, things like that. Now, in reality, it could well be believed that we just wanted the principle of not having to abide by EU rules, but that we will abide by EU rules because it will be extra costly to us if we don't. So I would expect the government not to diverge from those standards, certainly for the foreseeable future, because why would you? So it'll be like, oh, we don't have to follow EU rules, but we now choose to anyway. All right then. Next one, does it impose costs on British businesses? Yes. Already covered that really. Registration fees, customs declarations, extra labelling, all that sort of thing. All of those things cost money and were not applicable before Brexit. Does it downgrade any of our rights? Maybe. Not sure on that one yet. Brexit downgrades some of our rights, certainly. There's no doubts about that. We have lost rights as a result of Brexit. But that's as a result of Brexit, like losing the right to travel, live, and be educated freely across much of Europe. But the deal doesn't downgrade those rights. So does the deal downgrade any rights? Maybe. For me, the jury's out on that one. May well be that there is something in the deal that downgrades some of our rights further, beyond what Brexit alone would do. Does it make the UK less secure? Again, I can't be sure. The fact that we have a deal, it does include arrangements on security. So it makes us more secure than in a no-deal scenario, certainly. The deal does include an agreement on security. But we're not comparing with a no deal, we're comparing with what we had before. In this case, of course, I'd need to see a full analysis by security experts. I am not one. I believe that there are still some security provisions that we've opted out with the deal. As such, of course, that would make us less secure than beforehand. We do not have the same level of policing cooperation with the EU as we did as members, as far as I can tell at the moment. And that would mean holes for criminals to slip through, making us less secure. And finally, in terms of who wins this deal, that's obvious, the EU does. The value of goods traded is higher for the EU than it is for the UK. Brexiteers are constantly telling us about this. We import, in terms of value, we import more goods from the EU than we export to the EU. So the balance of trade there is in favour of the EU. When it comes to services, it's completely the other way around. So essentially, both goods and services are very important to both the EU and the UK. But goods are more important to the EU economy, even Brexiteers don't deny that, and services are more important to the UK economy, although they don't talk about that, because Brexit screws that completely. Now, this deal covers trading goods in quite a lot of detail. It doesn't do very much at all for services, although it looks like the EU might be, in a bit of a quid pro quo. We've agreed a deal now. They've got the deal they wanted. They're willing to throw in a few little sweeteners on services, but only limited. So you do the maths. We've got a deal that covers goods. That's what the EU want. We don't have a deal that covers services. That's what we need more of. So those are my thoughts on applying different tests to the Brexit deal. There will be many others. 2021 is going to be a huge year for Brexit. The Brexiteers may be saying that the Brexit wars are over and it's just going to die down now. That's just what they'd like to think. It's very much in the same way that Napoleon thought he'd won at Waterloo because he'd captured the farmhouse, but then Blucher turned up. Hopefully this time Blucher will turn up in the form of a more organised pro-EU resistance force than the one that has failed over the last 4 years. But we will see. Until then, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.